Okay, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about this gravity game that I created. In another video I talk about a very simple WebSocket example. This is a more general purpose one. Okay, and this is only going to work if the server is already running. Okay, so there's my server running, and here's my client, and I can have multiple clients here running at the same time. Okay, there's three main parts to this. One is the JavaScript canvas, which I've talked about in another video. Second is the WebSocket, which I talked about in the chat. Information about the chat program. And then gravity. Okay, so I'm just going to take it through looking at first the server. So this is the gravity server. There's a WebSocket that gets included from here and is running on this port, and that's going to tie into the web page that's also going to connect on that socket. And there's a gravity.js file that has functions to do calculations about gravity. Okay, and the basic way things are set up here is when a client connects, when they click on something, those will be new planets, and the coordinates get sent to the server. So there's going to be some send on the client. In this index.html, there's going to be some .send, and that's happening inside of a left click, and that's basically putting in the x and y coordinates of where they clicked. That's going to go and get sent to the server. Okay, so that's basically what the clients are doing, is sending coordinates, and then the server is responsible for calculating where everything is. Okay, so the server is doing calculations about where things should be using the laws of gravity. The clients are responsible for sending their x and y coordinates, and then the server is also responsible for sending out periodically to the clients where everything is, and the clients will draw that. So if we look inside of the client, there's the .send, we saw that, and then there's going to be the event handler for when there's a new message. So the WebSocket is created when there's a new message. If it's of type world state, that's the main one that gets used. Gravity.items is going to be where those items are stored. So we just stored off the data items. Okay, and then there's going to be a timer that goes off. So there's a window.set timeout with a timer with a number of milliseconds, so it goes every 100 milliseconds. We're going to go ahead and redraw the where everything is. And that's coming from, so if we look here, redraw, 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 redraw. So there's the redraw. Okay, and this is basically canvas stuff. So we get the canvas, which is a tag in the HTML, the 2D context, clear it out, and then this is going to be the loop to draw all these items. And that's coming from gravity.items, which is set by the world state message. Each one of those items is some object that has a color, an x coordinate, a y coordinate, and a radius. And this is just the instructions to draw a circle, a filled circle, which I talked about in another video. Okay, so this redraw is happening every 100 milliseconds because of this timer with window.setTimeout. And those, it's pulling the objects from this gravity.items, which is ultimately coming from this world state message out of the server. If the server is not connected, the world state never happens, and this gravity.items never gets set. When they click, we build a new object that has an X and a Y that comes out of the event that they clicked. Vx and Vy is supposed to be velocity. Just set those to 0 initially. The server is going to be responsible for that. Mass is some constant. Color is the color of this client, and the radius is 4. And this gets sent to the server. So we send a connection where the message is a new object, and the member new obj is actually that object which has all of this stuff inside of it. And that's on the server. In the server, when there's a new message, if that message is a new obj, then there's a function gravity.newItem inside of the gravity.js. So there's something in here, new item, which just puts the item onto a variable called items, which is defined up here. Okay, so that's all that happens when we get a new message, a new item message. So something else that happens inside the server is there's a timeout that happens every 100 milliseconds, and every 100 milliseconds we send an update of the current state of the world. So we have this message is world state, items is the gravity.items, and so that goes out every 100 milliseconds. About where everything is. Okay, so that gets sent out every 100 milliseconds. If we look up above, there are a few other things that happen. There's a list here of players, which are colors. There's max players, which is the number of players there. And there's a gravity.init, and the way that gets tied in is the gravity.js file in Node. There is, so if we're running in Node, then we set a module.exports, which is this variable here. So this variable here is, so there's a parenthesis that ends right here. This is a function, gravity, and inside of there a bunch of things are defined, and then this is returned. So there's something, there's a width item that has the value width, there's a remove player that has value remove player. These are all functions or variables that are being exported. They can be used over here. So gravity.init is one of those. So the way that gets parsed is the gravity function gets run, and then this is what's returned, which is there's something called init, which has the value init. Okay, so inside of the init, what happens is we delete everything that's in the items. If there was anything there, if we're initializing, there's a new object that is at the center, so width over 2, height over 2, which has 0 velocity and has 1,000 times the mass of whatever we're using for planets. And the mass of what we're using for planets is this 1 billion. There's no units there, it's just some number. Color is yellow, radius is 20, so that is that's the one that shows up in the middle here. Okay, then we call the new item function, which just adds this object into the items array. And if we're supposed to be setting a timeout, then we set the timeout for step in time, and there's two parameters there. So step in time. So the step in time set timeout will make the step in time occur after this many milliseconds, and it's going to pass in as a parameter this value. So that step milliseconds gets passed in as a value because of the second, the last argument there. And then this function here is responsible for updating the positions and the velocities based on gravity. So all of this stuff here is just doing gravity calculations for all of the items. Okay, so the way we do that is every item is going to have an acceleration that we initially set to be 0. So here's a .a. This A member has an X and a Y part, which is 0. And then we go through all pairs. This is going through all pairs of items and doing the gravity calculations of each pair with each other. So there's a function called gravity force that we give two objects, and that returns an acceleration of the first item to the second item. So we add those to each of the items. It's actually returning the gravity force is returning the acceleration of the first item and of the second item, which is doing equations according to gravity, which is just, if you look up acceleration due to gravity, then you'll see this equation here is what's happening. Okay, so that happens for all pairs, and that is modifying the X and Y parts of the accelerations. After those are all done, then the accelerations are set for all of the objects, and then the velocities will be updated based on the acceleration. So the Vx is changed by the acceleration in the x direction times the change in time, which is some number of milliseconds divided by 1,000. Okay, and then once the velocities are updated, I update the x and y positions based on the velocity, and this is making it do 1 day at a time, just to make it go faster. If things have gone off the screen, they're removed from the array list. Okay, and then every time the step in time is done, this sets it up to be run again in the same number of milliseconds. And remembering that this is the name of the function, this is how long in milliseconds it'll be, so it'll be run in that many milliseconds, and then anything else is a parameter to the function which comes in here. Okay, so just to recall the server, this gravity.init happens, and that's what initially sets the timeout. So that's an init with true, and then down here, after the server for the WebSocket is created, this timeout will send out to the clients every 100 milliseconds the current state of the world. If we look in those files, we got the world state, which just saves that that array into gravity.items, and then the HTML page is responsible for drawing those. Okay, so that's pretty much it. As with the chat program, you should be able to If you have an account on the CS server, you should be able to copy the contents of this directory into your public_HTML directory and run it. And if you want to test yourself on whether you understand what's going on, I'll give you some simple things that you could do. In another video.